Many people come to my channel because they're interested in forming a US LLC from outside the country and growing a business and paying no taxes. But I also get many questions about US immigration. Can I get a visa to come to the US? Can I bring my family with me? Can I get a green card? What happens if I get a green card? I'm already in the US, and I have a company. Do I have to pay taxes on that? All kinds of tax plus immigration questions together. And while I do love answering tax questions, I don't not the best person for immigration questions. Good news. Today, I have on my friend and colleague, Joaquin Rosales, who is an immigration expert, and we're going to have this discussion. So if you're interested in U.S. business, U.S. taxes, and more importantly, immigration in the U.S., getting visas, coming to the U.S., how it works, timelines, and all of those kind of things, you should definitely stick around for this video all the way to the end, because this is going to be a candid conversation where we go over the most frequently asked questions that clients ask us. And we're both meeting with tens of 20s of 30s of 40s of clients a week in our very busy time. So without any further a build up here, I have Joaquin Rosales Aramburu on the call. Thanks for being here, Joaquin. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you, Jim. My favorite accountant, my favorite CPA.
Yes.
Always a pleasure to share the knowledge that we have, and then hopefully help some people out. So yeah, let's get to it. What do you got for
Yeah.
me?
So Joaquin, we're often talking. You're in Miami. You're helping people who are immigrating to the U.S. What are the most common ways that you're seeing people, get visas right now to come into the U.S.? I mean, obviously, like the tourist visa would probably be the most common. Maybe a student visa second most common. But what are the common trends right now? What are people doing to get to the U.S. and like how do they determine what visa is best for them?
Sure. So there's a whole range of different type of visas, dozens of visas, right? And within categories of certain visas, you have subdivisions of visas. Really, the question that you asked relies on what's the intention of the person, right? Because there's visas in here that give you the ability to live here, right? Bring your family here, but not particularly be a resident, right? And then obviously there are some tax implications that I know you've discussed before. And so all that has to be taken into account, right? What is your purpose? What is your final intention? If you want to be here, and for the long run, you want to make the United States the country for your family, for you to live in, then there's certain visas that obviously give you a path to a residency, or you can jump into other visas that can, eventually give you a path to residency, or perhaps you just want to be here for a couple of years, build a business, make some money, and then go back. So, sort of answering your question, it really depends on the intention of the person and what they want to do. But what we've seen a lot is, for example, investment visas. So, there's always sort of two sides to these type of visas and all visas overall. Either one that gives you the opportunity to be here temporarily, or one that gives you the opportunity to be here and become a resident and eventually a citizen. So, on the investment side, a very interesting one and popular one is the E2. So, unlike another visa that is very sort of known around the world, which is the EB5, it's not, relatively speaking, not that expensive in terms of the investment amount. For the EB5, which leads you to a residence here in the
The
United
green card.
States, right?
The green card. Yeah.
A green card, you have to you have to invest at least $800,000. So I mean, not everybody has that amount of money, right? But there's other options like the E2, which, for example, if you want to buy a franchise, there's franchises out there, and we work very closely with very good companies that can put you in contact with these franchises that are, in the 80,000, 90,000, $100,000 range. You can also sort of buy an existing business. You can also create your own business, right? The purpose of this visa is give you the ability to come over here, sort of promote, the economy, stimulate the economy, give jobs to Americans and residents here in the United States. And so long as that you have a pretty good team that helps you out, set up sort of the LLCs, the operation that is needed in order to start this visa process, like the LLC bank account and all that. You should be pretty good to go ahead and get it, right?
Well, I want to
So the
interject here. I want to interject real quick, Joaquin. I mean, if you're following the channel, you've seen my channel. I did interview Patrick from Visa Franchise like 8 videos ago. So if you're interested in the E2 Visa and the franchise, I go into great detail in that interview about different franchise options and how that whole process works. So if you are interested in a non-immigrant visa to come to the U.S., basically come and go as you please, and potentially come to the U.S. and not actually be a tax resident, the E2 is a great option. So I want to take a step back and then and then take a step back and then zoom back in. So let's talk about non-immigrant visas. What are the top four non-immigrant visas? You mentioned the E2, which is a small investment and it's not an immigrant visa. It doesn't lead to a green card. It just allows you free entry and exit into the U.S. What are some other non-immigrant visas that are very popular?
For Canadians and Mexicans, you have a TN visa, right? Where essentially you just have a job offer in here in certain particular fields. And it's a fairly, in comparison to other visas, fairly easy process, but it allows you to come here, work in the United States, live here with your family. So that's another visa, a non-immigrant visa. Another one is also the O1 visa, which is a sort of a talent-based visa, right? And essentially, the sort of letter of the law uh, says that it's for people who have extraordinary abilities. You typically can have, or you need an agent, right? If you want to sort of do freelance work and work for different, either as a sort of contracting basis for different companies, or you can work for a company specifically. Also, if you are in sort of the arts, film, etc., there's a subsection of the O1 visa, right, which allows you to come over here. And once again, it's very flexible. You can renew it just like the E2 a bunch of times, and you can be here. And it's a good option, which is a non-immigrant visa option. And you can potentially just move to another category later on that it's an immigrant visa. Another one is the L1. So the L1 is transfer of executives and managers, sort of high executive and managers from corporations and companies that want to sort of either start a subsidiary here in the United States, a new office L1 is what it's called, right? Or they already have an office in here, they have already an operation here in the United States, but they need that executive or that manager, right, in order to sort of expand their market, in order to have the ability to have a much better operation. And that's another non-immigrant visa. It's very popular.
As a student, so let's talk about the student visa, the tourist visa, and the student visa, real quick, because those first three you mentioned are good options. There's definitely a process involved, and we'll talk about the process in a minute. But I want to quick jump to like the tourist visa, and which you can briefly touch on, and then the student visa. So the tourist visas, they apply for it in their own country, right?
Yes, they do. So, you have to get an appointment in the consulate. Typically, people are sort of, misinformed a little bit about what the tourist visa really entails, because most of the times what you're really applying for is a B1, B2, and that's what most people usually get. So the B1, the first part, the B1 is actually business, and the B2 is the tourist part. So people are like, hold up, does that mean that I can just come here and open up my business and start working? No, it doesn't mean that, but it doesn't prevent you from entering into the United States, closing deals, talking to your providers, sort of looking for more clientele. The only thing that you're not allowed to do is work without an authorization, a work
Well, you don't
authorization here.
qualify for employment. You can't be employed by somebody.
You can't be employed, exactly. But that part of the B1, B2 basically entails your ability to, like I said, talk to your providers, talk to potential clients, close some deals, seal some contracts, whatever it may be, buy some stuff for your business that you might have here, but you're not actually employed here in the United States. So you can utilize that B1, B2, and then obviously the B2 is for tourist purposes, right, or medical purposes as well. You can come in here because you want to get some procedures done that you can't do in your country. So they'll allow you to come in and get those procedures done
And I
here
want
in
to
the United
interject again about this before you go to the tourist or the student visas. I found that I recommend my clients when they're coming in on a B1 B2 to not ever mention that they have a US LLC, not to ever mention that they're doing anything with USCIS, and not to ever mention anything about business or about having an LLC, even if you have one, just because they don't know what's going on, and focus on the tourism when getting if you get interviewed by someone on your entry. Like, do you have any like other thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think it's a great advice. So it's the rule of thumb, I guess, would be, don't give more information than what you're being asked for, right? So a lot of people typically just think that, by talking about, yes, I have an LLC and all this, it's going to be a smoother process. And look, having an LLC here and a business here doesn't mean that you can't come into the United States. That's not the point. The point is when people don't know how to explain themselves. So, like you said, is a better advice to just simply not talk about it unless you're directly asked about that type of stuff, because the officer holds basically the keys to your entry to the country, right? And they're the ones that have the first interview with you and are trained to look for things that might indicate that you might want to stay here, you might want to be working without authorization. So when you start spilling about I have, LLC here and company here without being asked that, then you might give the impression that either you want to stay or you're working without an authorization. That's not something that might end up well, right? So it's sort of like, okay, like you're giving a good impression or a bad impression to the agent. So so long as you know how to explain yourself correctly and you're saying, look, I'm not working here, I just simply have an LLC. If you're asked that directly by the agent, then that's fine. But there's no reason for you to mention that type of stuff when you're entering with a tourist visa.
And there's tax experts who still don't understand the concept of having a foreign person owning like a tax exempt online LLC, like an LLC that doesn't have to pay taxes because it's all the services are done abroad. There's still a U.S. tax expert that don't understand those concepts. So it's very understandable that U.S. CIS agents also don't understand the concept, and they'll think that you have a business, you're employing people, and you're doing all kinds of stuff you're not allowed to. And I've had clients get their visas tore up basically at the
Yeah,
border
exactly.
because they talk too much. So that was a quick aside. It's not
That's a
funny,
good
but it's
point. I mean, it
yeah,
goes both ways, right? It's like the officer doesn't really even know that you can do that, right? Because
yeah. He doesn't
they
know.
deal with
You tell
immigration.
him like, well, I have a company, and I like, what? You have a
Yeah,
company?
yeah,
That's not your
exactly. They
business.
don't.
You do that?
That's
Yeah,
not their world. So it's better just to stay quiet unless you're asked directly a question about that.
So how does the student visa work? So I want a quick note about the student visa, which is awesome, is that if you come into the U.S. on a student visa for tax purposes, your days don't count. So you can come in, you can have $100 million company in I don't know, in Mexico, wherever you're from, and you can have this big company that makes a ton of money, and you can come to the U.S. and basically not report it, not pay tax on anything other than income you earn in the U.S. And as long as you're here on a student visa, your days don't count, so your presence doesn't count, so you're not a U.S. tax resident. So that's a huge benefit for people who want to test it out. So if you want to like test it out long term, I know a lot of Brazilians who are getting student visas and all that. So tell me a little bit about the process of applying and like what's the minimum like course load you can do and kind of how it works. Because I actually don't know that.
Sure, sure. Well, first off, I mean, just to underline a point that you kind of brought up, with a student visa, you're not allowed to work, right? One of the main requirements is that you have to be a full-time student, right? So you have to be, basically studying. I believe is 35 hours, maybe 30 hours. I'm forgetting it right now, but anyway,
Oh, it's
it's
30.
got to
It's
be
so
sort of
it's
a
a full
full-time.
course load.
Yeah, it's a full course load, and what usually happens, and the institutions that are approved by the subsection of the immigration department that deals with that, right? Essentially, give you after you're admitted to whichever university, college, or classes for, because I mean you can also do sort of English classes, right? So there's institutions that just focus on that type of stuff. But anyway, they'll essentially after you are approved, they'll give you some paperwork that you use to then apply at the consulate for you to get your F1 visa, right? And then given there's a couple of things that they look into, right? They look into more than anything. Number one, if you have the ability to sort of come here, study, and then pay for everything, not only the school, but your housing, food, and all that. So that's something that's very important when you go to interview, that you demonstrate that you have the ability to live here in the United States, pay for the tuition, and then also have housing and everything that goes along with living here in the United States, right? So it's really important that you have that and you have the ducks in a row when it comes to that. But once again, you can't work. You're sort of restricted in a lot of ways. I mean, if you're sort of thinking long term and trying to see, I mean, putting aside obviously the tax observation that you just mentioned, right? If you're really truly thinking about coming to the United States because you want to eventually stay here, there's other better options. And then you mentioned visa franchise and they're also really good now in sort of supporting people who are trying to make that trajectory and through one non-immigrant visa like the E2 or the O1, and then jumping into a immigrant visa that's going to give you a green card, right? So, I mean, it's important that you just know exactly what you want to do, get really good advice, because, like you said, there's tax implications, right? And I know it's regardless of the visa, besides the student one, it's like what is it, 183 days inside of the 2 years or something like that, and then you
So
count.
in general, immigration's like this from a tax standpoint. Immigration, you need approval to come in. You get that from Joaquin and his team. They love to help you with that. Now, from a tax standpoint, income earned in the U.S. is technically subject to U.S. taxes. Now, the presence-based taxation, if you have a citizenship or a green card, you're a U.S. tax resident, you report on your worldwide income. Now, there's a test called the substantial presence test. It takes 100% of your current year days, a third of your prior year days, and an eighth of days from 2 years ago. And if the total of those days is over 183, then you would technically become a resident once you cross that period. I mean, the starting date it's a little complicated, but that's the general rule. So if you're in the U.S. every single year, you kind of want to keep it under 120 days a year if it's every single year to avoid crossing the substantial presence test. Now, there are exceptions to the substantial presence test based on certain types of visas and certain types of residencies if you maintain a tax home in another country. But the general rule is 120 days year over year over year, or 183 days in a given year. If you stay below that, you won't be taxed as a resident. So that's
So it's
in a
not like
quick.
cumulative. I'll say it's not added on, right? It's not like I was here for,
It's
I don't know,
cumulative.
40.
It is cumulative, but it's from a year over year. You can avoid it by staying in under 120 days a year. But there's a math calculation. It's a simple calculation.
Right. So if you're like into a date 180, so long as you just sort of, your next year you stay under 120,
Well,
then
if you
you're
had
good.
180 days this year, you basically couldn't have had 80 days in the prior 2 years.
Right.
Because if you had
Right.
180 days this year and you had a week last year, that's going to be a third of
You're
those
done.
days. You're going to be over 183. So
Right.
it's a math calculation. You can Google
Right.
substantial presence test. The IRS website explains it pretty well.
Right.
So check that out. What's interesting
Right.
though is certain student visas basically say that your days don't count for the substantial presence test. If you're in the U.S. on a student visa, what work can you or can't you do? Like, you obviously can't get a job because you won't have a social security number unless you get like the J1E thing, unless you get like that little exemption to work. What is work? What's taxable? And technically, based on the study and the report that we read, I mean, that I shared with you, I think it said that you can technically work for yourself, but I think technically it would be subject to U.S. tax, but no one really
Well,
imposes
look,
it like that. So
that's a
it's
very,
complicated. It's nuanced, right?
yeah. So unfortunately, yeah, it's nuanced, and unfortunately, in the world of immigration, there's a lot of discretion on behalf of the agents that you
Yes.
might, sort of encounter, right? Or when you're doing applications, and the agents are adjudicating your case, right? So obviously, when these regulations were sort of written, they weren't, the internet wasn't even a thought, and much less making money, sort of providing services via the internet, much further of a thought, correct?
Yeah.
So, in essence, that wasn't covered. But like the black letter of the law says, you cannot work here in the United States, period. Now, some people might want to make the argument that, look, if I'm not sort of getting any clients inside of the United States, right, getting paid by those clients inside of the United States for the work that I'm doing on my computer, and say I'm doing work for, only Europeans, and they're paying me for the work that I'm doing on my computer, I'm fine. uh, I guess you could make that argument, but there's some agents in immigration that would say, no, that's work. You're working
Well, first
here,
of all,
and that's going to be a problem.
you don't want to you wouldn't affirm it. You wouldn't like go out of your way to tell the agent that you're doing that, is the first thing. And then the
But
second thing is
there's
that,
questions, there's questions in forms that directly ask you whether or not you have worked, and you
yeah, so
cannot
it
lie.
comes down to the interpretation is when they say have you worked, does that mean have you worked the job under an employment, not have you done work on the internet to improve yourself? Like, have you developed something on the internet that you can sell remotely? Like, have you done something like that? It's hard to stop people from doing any kind of creative
Like,
venture at
well, like I
all.
said, well, look, like I said,
Are you a Twitch streamer and you
how
meet between classes?
how can they don't have first off, they don't have the personnel nor the money, right?
Yeah,
Resources to be like trying to oversee or trying to catch people doing that. Number one, if that was actually something that they've made positively sure to let people know that it's not allowed. But like I said initially, it wasn't thought of when they were, writing these regulations. So it's a gray area. But I am of the sort of team that believes that you rather be safer and not do that type of stuff. Look, there are some other attorneys that might think differently, and they say, hey, look, if you're, not working and you're sort of like you said, building your own profile and I don't know YouTube content or whatever it may be, and you're making money off of that, that's not really working. Yeah, that could be an argument. It just hasn't really been clarified. We have never been given any guidance, even up to now. It's 2024. How many people make money, millions of dollars off of TikTok or YouTube or whatever it may be? You know
on
what
a
I mean? Or
student
like
visa. Yeah, making money on a student visa.
playing video games. So like me and you have actually talked to people who make a pretty substantial amount of money playing video games, and they're being followed in whatever platforms. So like, is that working? I mean, I
Well,
guess I don't know.
one thing I will specifically interject again here is that it is specifically stated on the IRS website that if you are a non-resident on a student visa, your capital gains are subject to, I believe, a 30% tax. So if you are stock trading, your capital gains are subject to tax. So you can day trade if you want, but you're subject to tax on that. When normally a non-resident isn't subject to tax, but a non-resident in the U.S. on a student visa cannot get away with the capital gains tax exemption. So, but without making this video only about that topic, I want to keep it moving. What are the general, just like one last point on the non-immigrant visas? What are the general timelines for these things? Like, how long does it take to get an E2 if you want one?
Well, yeah, well, I was gonna say it depends on the visa, right? So like the visa in itself, for example, like the E2, I mean, that can be built out, in 2 months, right? The only variable there is the consulate, right? Because depending on the consulate, some consulates take longer to schedule an appointment, and some other ones are really really quick. The U.S. consulate in your country.
So it's
So
a
yeah,
U.S. like office that's in your country. Yeah,
yep, absolutely. So some of them, are a little bit more backed up. So like, I mean, depending on which consulate, I mean, on average, I guess you can save about around 6 months to be here from start of the process until you're here in the States. But some consulates are a little bit backed up, so it might take a little bit longer. And some are move really fast, and you can be here in 3 months. You know what I mean? So
beautiful.
that's the timeline on that.
Does having an LLC before starting does having an LLC in general help the immigration process ahead of time? I usually tell people it doesn't necessarily help because generally we'll start a new LLC when we start the process. But what's your opinion on that?
Well, look, it's not gonna, you know, it won't move the needle right towards like an approval. That's for sure. But it's sort of it could work as a sort of a preliminary step in order for you to begin your process of a visa like the E2. And sometimes visas that are um, immigrant visas, right? Where you're trying to do a self petition, and we're going to talk about later on, right? And you're saying, hey, look, I'm a guy who is really good in my profession. You guys should want me to be a resident. I'm not going to work for a company, but I'm going to create my own company and I'm going to do consulting because I'm so good at what I do. And here are my sort of proof that I can do this work by having an LLC that I've created, a business plan, right, my bank account, and like I said, a business plan that sort of details what your marketing strategies are going to be, who your clientele is going to be, etc. So yes, having an LLC, especially if it's in the field that you are going to continue working on, right, could be helpful as a
It could be
preliminary.
helpful, and it doesn't hurt or negatively impact an immigration application, and it could be
It's
helpful.
not.
So
No, it's not negative at all whatsoever. That's for sure.
if you're interested in moving to the U.S. and getting a green card, I mean, there's like three different types of visas, right? Joaquin, can you break us through and just list them, like the EB1 to the EB5, right?
For example, if you have parents or citizens, if you have kids are citizens over 21, if your spouse is a citizen, right, or you're in residence, right, they can do petitions for you. Even if you're a brother or sister of a citizen, they can do a petition for you, right?
It just takes a
Um,
lot longer, right?
yeah, it's by category. So what they call sort of like the nucleus of the family. So if it's like a spouse, right, there's not a weight on the visa, right? If it's like a child under 21, there's not a weight on availability of the visa, right? If it's a parent of a citizen, there's not a weight for it, right? But then, for example, if you move into a brother or a sister of a citizen, you're in a different category, and that takes longer because they don't give priority to them, right? So it really
What's
depends
it
on
what's
which
it take?
category you're.
What's it take if you want to get your sister a visa?
What does it take? You have to do a family petition. So, depending on, there's certain countries that are so backlogged, like Mexico, for example, in terms of family visas.
What about like Panama?
They're not on they're basically. I mean, you can go to Visa Bulletin. You just put a Google Visa Bulletin, and then the month that we're in, June, July, 2024, and it's going to take you to this website from the State Department that tells you the estimate wait times, right?
Oh,
Given
cool.
the amount of time, the amount of applications that they're receiving, and the amount of applications that they're processing, and it'll tell you, look, if you're not one of these immediate relatives that get a visa automatically the second that they're approved, and you fall into these different categories, here's the wait time for this category. Here's the wait time for this other category. So it's pretty
Okay,
easy.
so that's only for U.S. citizens who want to petition for their family members to come in. So you can check out the
Residents
visa bulletin. Yeah.
and residents get just residents can also petition for
Oh,
spouses.
residents can do it too. So green card holders can also petition. Okay, cool.
not not brothers and sisters, or parents, but spouses and children.
Oh, cool. Okay, so now let's go through the rest of the big ones, like the ones that you would apply for and get a green card for based on merit or money.
So as we discussed at the beginning of the conversation, so like there's the equivalent of the E2, which is a non-immigrant visa. The immigrant equivalent is the EB5. So in this particular visa, which leads you to a green card, they are specific requirements of investment. So minimum $800,000. Essentially, what happens is that money goes, to explain it very easily, right? It goes into, say, a fund. You don't really have any sort of control of what happens. You don't have any operational decision making control whatsoever. It goes into this sort of regional, it's called a regional center, right? That's approved by USCIS and the government. And then they go in and do projects in areas of high unemployment or rural areas around the country, right? So those are called the regional centers. So
Usually
you
like
don't
construction, commercial building kind of stuff, right? Usually
stuff
like
like
big
that,
old
yeah.
big projects.
Like
Yeah.
malls, yeah. There's a couple of them, but I mean the point that you need to sort of get out of this is that you're not going to be making any decisions in there. You put that money in there, 3 years later or so, 2.5, you get your green card, and then a little bit later on, you get your money back. You might make a little bit of money. You might make break even, but
Generally like
sometimes
maybe
you
some
make good
interest.
money.
You're not gonna it's not gonna be a flush, amazing 10% return investment, but you're getting a green card out of it, and if you pick the right regional center that has a history of doing it, you can get your money returned with
Yeah,
pretty
I mean, like,
reasonably.
most likely you'll get your money return and make a profit. You know what I mean? They really clamp down on sort of these regional centers that were sort of fraudulent in the sense that they were just failing, and they weren't sort of returning any investment. So they're really pretty strict with that now. So it's something
And
that
a lot
now, yeah.
there's a lot of repeat people doing it, right? There's like different companies that do fund big projects with regional centers that have multiple projects going on. They do it in a
A lot
really
of them
safe
in
way for the
Miami.
investors,
Mhm.
right? All over Miami, yeah. So if you have
A lot of them
money
in
and you
Miami.
just want a green card and you don't mind waiting and investing, the easiest way is to just call Joaquin and look at some options because Joaquin always knows people, right?
There's
So
a there's like a second part to the EB5. If you don't want to do that and you want to do your own business, that raises the investment minimum to $1,050,000. Don't ask me why $50,000. It's, I don't know. That's how Congress approved it. It is what it is. So it's $1,050,000, And but this in particular then allows you to run your own business, right? There's certain requirements. For example, you have to add 10 new full-time American citizen or resident jobs, right, to
Okay.
the business. So, for example, let's say, I don't know, you buy a factory for $2 million and they already have 20 people in there. You can't say, oh, look, they have 20 people, I'm good. No, you have to add 10 more. You have
Okay.
to add
Yeah.
10 more employees to it. So, I mean, there's more requirements to that. Obviously, the source of funding is very important.
Tell me a little bit about the EB1, EB2, EB3s, and what those are, because those are really interesting.
Sure. So then the other sort of realm of immigrant visas fall under what are called employment-based visas. So we can go over through that. So if there's a company that's willing to sponsor you um, and want to bring you in to work for them, then they can go through a process which is called a labor certification process. It's a process that deals with the Department of Labor first, then USCIS. But essentially, if there's a company that's interested in you and they can prove that they're unable to find, American or residents here in the United States to do that position and that job, that you can come in as a resident with your family in here and then work for them. So that's on that side. But also, it falls under the employment-based visas. We have what's called the EB1 and the EB2, and those are self-petitioning visas. So essentially, the EB1, the letter of the law, states that it's for people with extraordinary abilities, and then the EB2 NIW, which is the National Interest Waiver Visa, is the second option. And essentially, what you're doing is saying, look, I'm so good at what I do that you want a person like me in the country, and I don't need an employer, I don't need a family member, I don't need anybody to petition for me. Like, you should want me there. So they look at different criteria, and obviously, business and professional plans really help out. So it's good to have
I know you've
um,
gotten, I've,
companies.
you've gotten a
Yeah.
number of my clients I've referred to you. You've gotten them green cards with the EB2 NIWs, like just exceptional people who are either influencers, let's say like Olympians, or let's say like broadcasters, say you're famous in your field. You basically, from my understanding, you put together this big old binder. You're showing about how awesome you are, and you're like, nice. And then you send it in, and they're like, yeah, it isn't. Yeah, let them in, and they give them a green card, right?
Yeah, so there's different criteria, and I don't want to give the impression that it's only like, oh, you have to be like an Olympic diver or gold medalist in order to
No,
get
like a
this. I mean,
famous,
there's
like I
people.
mean,
Look, we
yeah,
got one. Look, we got one. We literally got one on the EB1, which is the first category. In theory, the hardest visa to get, right? Self-petitioning visa for a gentleman that is going to come here and do vertical farming, right? Why? Because that's extremely important to the United States. And it wasn't even the EB2 national interest waiver visa, it was the EB1, but he was just so good at what he did, right? And that he, with the help of, third party companies that we work with, right? Had a great business plan, of how he was going to implement all his his experience, and then basically do vertical farming here in the middle of Florida. And they give it to him. So like it's
amazing.
everything. It's
I mean,
engineers and people work in the steel industry. It's like all sorts of different professions that you wouldn't even think about. So yeah. So essentially, those are the ones that are self petitioning, and you're saying, like you said, hey, I'm awesome. You want me in your country? Let me in. Here's the proof. It's not that simple, but that's the essence of it.
it's that simple. It's that simple, everyone. At the end of the day, I tell people all the time, if you want to come to the U.S., you get a good attorney to talk about your options. There's a way. There's always a way to come to the U.S. You can figure something out. It doesn't always. It's not going to cost you $1,050,000. There's going to be some kind of way we can figure it out. But the best way to do it is to schedule a call with an immigration attorney who's gotten all kinds of visas for all kinds of different people from all kinds of different countries. And then you can discuss your options. And then if you have to do a couple things to fit into a box to qualify, then that's what you make a plan and you do it. So, Joaquin, I could talk to you all day. We're at like 35, 36 minutes now. I don't know how much they're going to cut out of this. I think the peoples are asleep by now. So just I want to wrap up the call, and I want to say, if you're interested in immigrating to the U.S. or exploring or discussing your options, where can people contact you, Joaquin? Do you have like an email or a website or something that is best?
I mean, you can go to amerigolegal.com, or just send an email to info@amerigolegal.com, and we'll be more than glad to talk to you and see what choices are available to you.
I would recommend it. If you're interested in coming to the U.S., I refer all my clients to Joaquin. And I appreciate you being here, buddy. I hope this video was helpful to everyone else. Comment, like, subscribe, comment if you have any questions, and I'll answer them. And I'll tell you to schedule a call with Joaquin in my answer. Okay, so if you watched the whole video, I appreciate you. And thanks for being here, everyone. See you on the next one.